Tipping Spheres with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, we're thrilled to welcome Tanner Yackley. Tanner is a former MQ-9 Reaper sensor operator and combat instructor with over 3,000 flight hours in remote warfare operations. Now, a trauma-informed advocate and PhD researcher, Tanner is the founder of Remote Warrior, a mission-driven initiative supporting drone veterans and intelligence professionals living with complex PTSD and moral injury. Through his signature tools like the Fog of War, CPTSD Guide, and Panic Packs, Tanner blends lived experience, psychology, and tactical insights to drive systematic reform in military mental health. His work has reached national platforms and is actively reshaping how trauma in invisible combat zones is understood and treated. Welcome to Tipping Spears, Tanner.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, so just kicking things off, can you tell us kind of where your story begins?
Yeah, absolutely. Begins as a ripe old 18-year-old getting out of high school and living in small town Minnesota at the time, and it was just like, all right, well, I either got two options. I got to go to college, or I got to go do a trade, or the military, really. So three options there, but so I chose the military route. I didn't have any desire to want to continue school and things like that, being a snot-nosed punk 18-year-old and everything else. So I jumped into it and came across, this is 2010. So I came across, a recruiter that was like, hey, there's these interesting things out there. They're called drones, and let's see what they are. And you get to control a camera, and be able to watch, real-time things happen. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of cool. With it. And so I was like, well, let's do that. So I jumped into it and just kind of started along that path as a bright-eyed 18-year-old, just jumping into it, not really having a clue what I was getting into, truly with it. So.
So, was there a particular event or person that served as kind of a catalyst for your career journey?
I mean, I think early on it was definitely my dad because he was prior Air Force. So, it was seeing him and seeing what he did and going, that's, being able to serve with a purpose and serve something bigger. Granted, I didn't realize how big of an operation I was truly getting into at the time. Because, especially the teens, people don't necessarily realize how much, I was on the MQ-9 Reaper. And which is what we call a remotely piloted aircraft. Is usually the preferred vernacular there for anybody in the business. But they get drones, they get UAS, they get everything out there. But yeah, so early on it was definitely him that kind of pushed me to go that route. But then it was once I found out I was kind of good at it, then it was just like, all right, well, let's see what my ceiling is, and be able to kind of keep pushing myself there, which is why I became a combat instructor fairly quickly and started, pursuing down that path, if you will, within teaching and taking on more leadership roles within units and things like that.
So, every journey, has its hurdles. Can you tell us kind of what some of the biggest obstacles you faced, in your career were and kind of how you overcame them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was the interesting thing with the way that, a lot of us were put through that program, is there wasn't really there was nothing traditional about what we did, right? For one,
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
lot of people that, especially if anyone has a military background, they think of the structure, they think of, the Air Force, you get the little brown book, that, rank structure, and, your master sergeants are going to be your technical experts and be your leaders and your supervisors, and your staff and tech are going to be more of those, hands-on, and your airmen are your learners. Well, we had a bunch of evaluators as airmen first class running around, within the operation. So you took that little brown book and you chucked it out the window, with it because it just didn't exist,
Mhm.
within this community. And so, one, we were, we were air crew. So that created its own, stigmas with the whole thing. Of course, and we're running around in flight suits and never leaving the
Mhm.
ground, so
Yeah.
that added a funny layer to everything, and with it. But it was definitely one of those things that people didn't necessarily realize how unique this
Mhm.
was truly. Because there's plenty of times where I would sit shoulder to shoulder as a 19-year-old kid with a full bird colonel
Mhm.
to my left that's controlling the aircraft,
Mhm.
and we're just sitting there talking about life.
Mhm.
Because you've been in the box, we call it, right, in the ground
Mhm.
control station. It's about a 30 by 10-foot Connex box
Mhm.
looking deal for most part. Um, and when you're sitting there for that long with somebody night after night after night, like eventually, you just start naturally talking about whatever.
Mhm.
So that rank and everything else and that normalcy to the military and that structure
Yeah.
really just after our initial training just out the window. Because you couldn't afford, I
Mhm.
couldn't afford to sit there, and that's really what it came down to was, I couldn't sit there and go, all right, you know, Colonel, we need this, blah blah blah. It was like, dude, this now. Because it was everything we did was so had the potential to be so fast, right?
Mhm.
And needing to employ so quickly. Because especially in the teens, everybody, every ground commander, every, joint terminal air controller, all of it, they wanted a Reaper above them.
Mhm.
And rightfully so,
Yeah.
because it was like we provided, that unblinking eye for
Mhm.
one, and two, we gotta see what was behind that next hill,
Yeah.
right? Behind that next building, that type of thing with it. So it allowed for, these people on the ground in real time to look at a screen that was, literally what's the word? Mirroring what we were
Mhm.
seeing, and so we could talk them through real time. And so
Yeah.
because of that, it was just the operations tempo was just, in the teeth of it, with the entire thing, with the focus area and the training and everything else was just, we need more, 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 more,
Mhm. Mhm.
for it. So it, again, made for a very unique environment on
Mhm.
top of, already being air crew, already doing this funny thing where you're sitting in a box. Um, because I was outside Las Vegas for it, and I'm controlling a plane 7,500 miles around the world,
Yeah.
with it, and it's like, so makes for a really weird conversation when someone's like, "Well, did you deploy?" And I'm like, "Nope." I'm like, "Nope, never once." Like, I never once deployed in my 10 years of operating it. But I've flown over 1,000 combat missions,
Yeah.
with it. So it,
Yeah.
it makes for a unique aspect to it that people don't necessarily realize.
Yeah. And so with the global war on terror was really the first time drone operations were used at this scale, right? So y'all are, I mean, this is like emerging technology in terms of how it's being applied. And then it sounds like it's really interesting to kind of hear you describe that, well, the military is so structured and
Hmm.
hierarchical, but yet how do you take this massively emerging technology needed to save people's lives and complete the mission and fit all that new stuff into, a military branch that is structured and rigid, and this new stuff doesn't necessarily, it's not like a you just bolt this on and go with
Hmm.
it, you know?
Absolutely. And that was the biggest challenge with the whole thing, because that right there bled into everything that we did.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it bled into the training
Mhm.
aspect to it, right? Because initially you're going through and you're doing your initial training, and usually it's in some local airspace, and that type of thing. But then once you get past that and you get into your combat unit and you start training, like it's not like I can be like, oh, let me go grab a plane that's outside.
Yeah,
My plane's halfway around the world.
yeah, yeah,
So that's also a unique aspect. Is it's like you want to talk about pilots doing a walk around. Like
yeah,
you didn't get to do that. Like because you're play you can't. What are you gonna
yeah,
do? Fly 24 hours and come back?
yeah,
Kind of thing.
yeah.
So the training was unique because obviously you wanted this structure with it
Mhm.
being in the military, but
Mhm.
we were literally writing the playbook as we
Mhm.
went through the
Mhm.
entire thing.
Mhm.
Whether it was, like I said, you had airman first class, two stripes and E3 with it that were running around and were evaluators
Mhm.
in it. And that's usually like a master sergeant,
Yeah.
or a tech
Yeah.
sergeant in any other, Air Force air crew realm. But we had the expertise, we had the knowledge,
Mhm.
right? Because we were in there flying it every single night.
Mhm.
And that's the piece that was, with the training aspect, like we didn't get dedicated necessarily training in the normal way,
Mhm.
right? You think of a fighter pilot, you think of any other aircraft with this. When do they train? Well, usually when they're home, right?
Mhm.
And they're home from deployment and they're training, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. Um, and that's dedicated training time, right? Their brain is saying, "Hey, this is training," right? We
Mhm.
didn't get that.
Mhm.
We had to go in, and half the time it was I'm on an active target. I move one screen away to what we'd call a tactical bush
Mhm.
there and go, all right, that's my aim point for the day. We're going to simulate that that's some, improvised explosive device
Mhm.
manufacturing or somebody digging an IED in the ground or anything like that. And we pick that pebble of sand in the desert and sit there and just
Yeah.
attack on it constantly and there was many times where you could be in the middle of a training event and they could come back and go, whoever we were supporting for the day could go, hey, we need you right back on target right now. Because, maybe, friendly forces are getting shot at, or somebody's, implanting an IED, or some,
Mhm. Mhm.
bomb maker is, setting up an attack, whatever. And so it made for this constant state of anxiety almost
Mhm.
with it. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, no wonder a bunch of guys are running around, myself included, that have like horrible anxiety now because
Mhm.
we were perpetually finger on a trigger
Yeah.
constantly.
Mhm.
And you know, needing 60 seconds at any time to be, hey, I don't care where you are in point in space, anything like that. You need to be able to turn in, point your nose at the target, and pull the trigger
Mhm.
at that point. So that aspect to itself made for a really unique environment because you were always on the hook. You were always
Mhm.
ready to go, ready to, perpetually pull that trigger. And, the other piece of that is I walked into shift, and again, I was on shift work. So it was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 4 p.m. to
Mhm.
midnight, midnight to 8 a.m. And we were on 7 week rotations
Mhm.
of it. And I did that for 4 years.
Mhm.
There was no breaks. There was no, hey, let's give you 6 months off it,
Yeah.
whatever, to kind of factor in your circadian rhythm here.
Yeah.
If anything, we didn't get that. It was just keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. Which, again, when you look at it on paper, it's like, well, yeah, what else were they supposed to do? But at the same time, nobody realized how
Yeah.
horrible that
Yeah.
environment was to the people operating
Yeah.
with it now.
Yeah. No, that brings up, you describe it so well. And I just kind of keep thinking about, you're on the front lines of this being used in warfare. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, they got to get this support to the battlefield. That's
Mm-hmm.
stateside, 4 years straight of no,
Yeah.
right, right. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're in the middle of war. This has got to go. But we didn't even think about, you know, there's a human. What is the
Mm-hmm.
impact of this? So I know, kind of after the military, you taught unmanned aircraft system courses at the University of North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you got the professor title and can talk
Yeah.
extensively on this topic, but
Yes.
can you give us the Cliff Notes overview of how kind of the eyes in the sky were
Mm-hmm.
used in modern warfare? So
Mm-hmm.
like with global war and terror, and even, what we're seeing now with Ukraine.
Sure. Yeah, no, of course. So, Global War on Terror, you essentially had two different mission types, right? You had your traditional, what we call coin or counterinsurgency,
Mhm.
with it. And so that's looking at, that could be doing friendly force overwatch, watching them go through and clear, towns, whatever, looking for things that are booby trapped,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Um, going after people that are like shooting mortars at people, overwatching helicopter landing zones, convoy overwatch where they're rolling down the road and you're sitting on the lead vehicle and just tracking it, and or you're scanning ahead of them,
Mhm.
and giving them feedback on like, hey, stop, hot spot in the road,
Mhm.
kind of thing, because we'd be right on the radio with them. And so that was kind of the more traditional aspect of it.
Mhm.
Um, and you so that lended itself to a lot of unique mission sets there, more traditional of your close air support.
Mhm.
We were even trained in things like air interdiction, strike coordination, and reconnaissance. There wasn't really a mission set, even combat search and rescue. We were trained to, be the on-scene commander in a combat search and rescue role. So things that people don't realize that, everyone thinks it's this platform with a lawnmower strapped to its butt and it's just, buzzing around in the sky. And it's like, no, we were fangs out, the entire time with it and being able to, press them there. And fun fact, the Predator actually had a snowmobile engine, was the first, so Rotax snowmobile engine. So
That's
it's pretty dang
neat.
close to the lawnmower there. But but it's so that part made it unique
Mhm.
within that because we were prepared to do all these different mission sets across the board, and obviously you're dealing with signals intelligence and human intelligence and
Yeah.
all of those aspects there. So it's not like we were just going out there and all right, let's just wing it for the day. You were pulling in, all right, what's the SIGINT
Mhm.
say? What's the human say? What's the, brief say? Do we have GRGs in this area?
Mhm.
And that one always escapes me, but it's, essentially the graphics and things like that that's saying like, all right, they're going to be on the orange route today or whatever,
Mhm.
as we're tracking them along. And then on the flip side, you had high value targeting.
Mhm.
And that's one obviously that, there's the shroud of secrecy with all of this in general. Because it was, we were told, especially throughout everything, like you can't talk about this, right? You
Yeah.
can't talk about anything you did, which
Mhm.
led to we can't talk about how we feel about it too.
Mhm.
And now, that's leading to the epidemic that we have, within
Mhm.
this industry now, with all these operators that are hitting the 20-year mark.
Mhm.
Because when you start doing the math and realize that, well, the Reaper came on station in '08, uh, you know,
Yeah.
then now we're at 2025. So you got a bunch of
Yeah.
people that are at 17, 18 years of operating this.
Mhm.
And I can tell you, there's ones out there that are just, oh my goodness, they've been doing it for too long,
Mhm.
honestly, is what it comes down to. And so it's shoot them up, spit them out, and then shoot them up
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
kind of thing. And now these people are running around just shells of themselves. And I'm sure we'll get into that here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so going back to the, what we're talking about with this is the high value target being the other one, that was a lot of what we called patterns of life,
Mhm.
right? So that was, I'm going in, and I'm watching, some person play with their kids. I'm watching them
Mhm.
hug their wife. I'm watching them go to the market and pick up groceries. But then I'm
Mhm.
also watching them like, go off and build a bomb,
Yeah.
on the side of the road or something,
Yeah.
or be some courier for some high value
Mhm.
target that is passing, humans and things like that
Mhm.
around, with it. And so it made for unique aspects in you had to move very quick in the high
Mhm.
value world, because like I said, you were perpetually finger on the trigger
Mhm.
constantly, because if the stars aligned, right, and everything lined up perfectly, then it was just all right, everything's met, like clear to engage,
Yeah.
right, with it. And that was the psychological aspect to it, this as well,
Mhm.
is that you never knew when that call was coming.
Mhm.
So, it could have been, hey, I got a brief. And, because you typical day you go in, you sit down, we were driving 45 minutes up to work, and then going in, sitting down at a briefing, getting intel, weather, what do we have on the table? What's the identifying marks on these people? Do they have a certain way that they walk? Do they have a certain
Yeah.
arm swing that they do, right? And this is the stuff that people don't realize, that we were always tracking, always, we knew, all right, this person's got a little bit of a hobble. This
Mhm.
person's missing a leg.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, or this person's got a certain vehicle,
Mhm.
with maybe a rust spot on the front right door.
Mhm.
That was the stuff that we had ingrained in us when it was came to the high value stuff because you couldn't afford to not know it.
Yeah.
Because that was such a, you put two white Hilux pickups next to each other, the terrorist vehicle of choice, with it, and the white Toyota Hilux pickup, and it's like, with the red stripe, and it's like you got to figure out which one's which, right? And
Yeah.
so it's you're looking for all these details, you're pulling out all this information,
Yeah.
um, and then potentially striking at a moment's notice,
Yeah.
with it. And it could be something as so boring as, I walk in, sit down, and there's already a track established, right? Because this isn't a fighter pilot that I'm
Mhm.
taking off, I'm flying the plane, I'm doing the mission, and then I'm coming home,
Mhm.
right? There could have been 10 people that operated this aircraft before I walked into the
Mhm.
ground control station. So which lends itself to its own obvious nuances with human
Mhm.
factors and everything else there. But the big thing with that is you didn't always have all the information because you weren't the one doing the mission through
Mhm.
and through, right? You get these aircraft can stay up, up longer than 24 hours.
Mhm.
So of course you're not going to have, you're going to have at a minimum like 2 to 3 crews on one aircraft, and
Mhm.
that's if they're cranking through 8-hour shifts, which back then we absolutely were.
Mhm.
It was super common for us, and that's why I have an insane amount of hours in a 3 year and 10
Yeah.
month span. I did 3,000 hours.
Wow.
Usually that's a 30-year fighter career,
Mhm.
with it there. So it made it very unique when it
Mhm.
came down to, how we were trained, how we operated, and then these different mission sets here. And then getting on to your second point of that question, which was, what does this look like for Ukraine?
Mhm.
Um, One, a lot of things from Ukraine pulled from like 2016 within ISIS, there. So, they were doing a lot of things with attacking people with, like they were doing these drop harnesses and stuff like that with essentially strapping mortars to the bottom of quadcopters and dropping them
Mhm.
and being kind of effective with it, with it. And then what did that evolve to? Well, now that evolved to, racing drones with C4 on it,
Mhm.
that are whipping around at 80, 90 miles an hour. And,
Mhm.
they don't care. It's all, it's a $400 drone. It's a heck of a
Mhm.
lot better than a $110,000 missile,
Mhm.
or whatever, or a couple $1 million aircraft,
Mhm.
with it, and then you take a couple of these and now you've got your own arguably, Air Force, with it,
I love that.
because I can take, 10, 15 of these things and
Yeah.
start flying them around, and I can collect
Yeah.
intelligence, I can collect information, right? I can drop munitions, I can strap
Mhm.
C4 to them and just say, all right, go detonate,
Yeah.
and that thing, and so it made for a really interesting evolution within this that obviously nobody was prepared for. I mean, we all
Yeah.
thought the Ukraine was going to be done and over in 6 months.
Yeah.
And it's still, we still, just get the videos and feeds all over my stuff all the time now,
Mhm.
with it. And so it made for a unique aspect because now, and you're seeing, I mean, you're literally seeing the first person view, camera,
Mhm.
from these aircraft and like watching them like dive bomb people and things like
Mhm.
that, and take off and take out tanks,
Mhm.
with it and different things like that. Or the racing drones, one tactic they were using years ago is they would take them, strap C4 to them, and since they can go 80 miles an hour, they would just whip them into buildings, and they didn't care that the signal got lost because as long as
Mhm.
they could break that threshold and get in there,
Mhm.
and then they would have it either on a, a crush switch or something like that that could
Mhm.
detonate, at that point, and then, and then be able to go off at that point. So
Mhm.
it it's made an interesting evolution there,
Mhm.
but at the same time, the one area, the one gap that's missing completely with it is what it's doing here,
Mhm.
to these people and doing to their psychology and their mind,
Mhm.
because you can't sit there and watch death and destruction on repeat, um,
Mhm.
and not have it affect you,
Mhm.
with it, right? And I think of it, as like the we've had a couple people allude it to think about the people that have to like scrub social media and stuff like
Mhm.
that. I've seen the horrendous stuff that gets put on
Mhm.
there. Um, Arguably it's a little bit similar, right?
Yeah.
Because we're having to watch death and destruction on repeat, right? And it was
Mhm.
watching horrendous things. I mean, if you can think of what one human being can do to another,
Mhm.
in some of the most horrendous ways possible, I've seen it through a camera.
Mhm.
I mean, I've seen just absolutely horrendous things throughout with it. You know, it didn't matter who was
Mhm.
in the proverbial crosshairs
Mhm.
there, and that's really what leads to a lot of this is not being able to do things in those moments, right?
Yeah.
You know, not being able to stop. You know, I watched some guy just randomly. There was two people walking down the street, and one guy pulled out a pistol and just shot the guy next to him.
Mhm.
And it was like, okay, you know, and then, you know, so what's the intent after that? It's all right, well, let's follow that guy and see where he
Mhm.
goes. You know, and it's like, are we what? Like that guy just died.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's not like anyone's like, hey, that was messed up. Do you want to talk about it? You
Mhm.
know, it didn't happen. It was
Yeah.
just all right, next target,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a great point, kind of that people just don't think about. So
Hmm.
in the concept of proximity. So in theory, right, in theory, it would be, okay, great, you're 7,500 miles away,
Hmm.
you're safe, right?
Hmm.
So we're removing you're not afraid the guy that just shot one guy is going to turn the pistol on you.
Yep.
So it's like our little fight or flight brain with that. But then we did not think about how seeing, this stuff and not being in proximity, not being able to react or
Hmm.
respond, like as if this is something you saw happen on the street. You could
Yep.
intervene, you could push for some type of an emergency response. You could, uh, compress someone's bullet wound. There's so much you
Hmm.
could do. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking kind of like the almost immobilization that kind of occurs out of just like 7,500 mile
Hmm.
separation. And then you just got to write a report about it, and
Yeah.
you can't even breathe. You got to stop, you got to track. This is intel, right? This is
Hmm.
necessary intel to support stuff that is happening on the ground. But what you're
Yep.
seeing is all this. I mean, it's so critical, and it is interesting to me to hear how quickly this technology came into not only use with the Reaper, but then how
Hmm.
that just rapidly snowballed into all the different types of,
Absolutely.
and then we just kind of haven't kept pace in
Hmm.
terms of, I mean, you're on the front lines of it in terms of, they didn't know how it was going to impact people. So just get behind
No.
a screen, Tanner, and just do,
Yep. Exactly.
it's
Exactly. Yep, and
like,
that's the biggest problem with it all, right?
yeah.
Is you know exactly what you're hitting on there, right? Is everyone thinks that oh you're physically separated, and you know what's the argument that's always thrown out there? It's like well you get to go home every night, so what's the big deal? And it's
Mhm.
like that's the problem. It's like can you imagine if you're soft or you're in law
Yeah.
enforcement, and law enforcement's a perfect example of this
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
it, right? Is because of what the horrendous things that they may need to deal with
Yeah.
and then they got to go home and sit down at that dinner table with their wife and
Yeah.
their kids,
Yeah.
you know, and go from there. So it was very unique in that aspect because it was like, you know, you couldn't talk about it. You couldn't, you know, there was no like, hey, honey, how was work? You know, like that wasn't a dinner time conversation. You know, oh yeah, I watched, you know, 30 people die today.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
that doesn't happen.
Mhm.
You know, with it. So, and Dave Grossman and Wayne Phelps both write touch books on this with on combat and on killing remotely.
Yeah.
And both those books really talk about that exact phenomenon, if you will, with
Yeah.
being physically separated
Mhm.
from this target, but you're still, that doesn't take away the human aspect to it just
Yeah.
because you're physically separated. And it doesn't take
Yeah.
away the moral injury piece to it when you
Yeah.
do watch that guy get shot in the street.
Yeah.
And then it's just, all right, move on, next target. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
You know, and then you get into the whole cognitive development. Like I was 19 years old when
Mhm.
I was 19 when I first, uh, well, when I got into my combat, but I was 20 when I first pulled a trigger
Yeah.
there. And so, you know, for that, you get like 6, 7 more years of brain development there. And I'm in
Yeah.
there, you know, in the furnace of it, trying to sit there and justify all this in my head and everything
Yeah.
else with it, which, you know, when you're working at such a breakneck pace,
Mhm.
and demanded of so much at so young, you know,
Mhm.
it was of course you kind of just pushed it all down, you know,
Yeah.
garbage compact it and said, all right, I'll
Yeah.
deal with that later.
Yeah.
kind of thing. And unfortunately, a lot of it is when people step away from the career field,
Yeah.
and they finally leave the box,
Hmm.
right? And pick their head up for the first time, and then it just hits them in the face because their mind is like, "What in the heck was that?"
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. You know you're encountering stuff. Your brain is all the alarms are going off.
Hmm.
And yet, you're just trying to survive this. You don't even know what you're dealing with at the time.
Absolutely.
Because the mission has to continue. This has got to
Hmm.
happen.
Hmm.
And you play such a
Exactly.
critical role in it. This is, I don't know if this aligns but so I think, but both of us probably generationally are pretty similar in that it's
Hmm.
like we saw the internet explosion, like
Hmm.
technology. Like I'm assuming you, like me, remember like VHS, renting
Yep.
videos, and like, but so
Yep.
we saw this tech stuff
Hmm.
connect the world, so many awesome things,
Hmm.
and then there's this other side of it. It's like, okay, well, people are weaponizing this.
Hmm.
And one thing that was that interesting to me a few years ago was I was researching and doing some work on specifically gender violence stateside online. So it's cyber
Hmm.
sexual harassment,
Hmm.
very serious, very, very just egregious stuff like
Yeah.
rape threats,
Hmm.
deep fake porn that is like
Hmm.
all weaponized
Yep.
towards people. And what's interesting, Tanner, was when I would get called in to like help fix this problem,
Hmm.
a big hurdle that I would keep encountering with people that did not really understand how quickly technology was like exploding and
Hmm.
impacting folks was that they said, well, it's just on a screen. So this isn't, how does this bother people? It's just on a screen. And as you were describing kind of some of the scenarios, I felt like kind of, that gap, people not understanding that you're behind a screen, you're seeing these things. Our brains are
Hmm.
wired to keep us alive and to read
Hmm.
threats and to react, right?
Yep.
To like, and as you were describing kind of that mentality of the resistance there of like, okay, just do, 4 years of a kind of con
Hmm.
Xbox, just do this day in and day out. And I was thinking back to kind of the resistance I encountered on the similar topic, not a similar
Hmm.
topic, but a different topic.
Sure.
Whereas people were just like, well, it's just on a screen, and they weren't getting kind of the multi-domain world we live in. We've got physical world, we've got, kind of the cyber world, and
Hmm.
they mesh in weird ways that our
Hmm.
little brains are not, it happened really fast. We're not,
Absolutely.
what we're taking in and what it's doing to us is something I feel like we don't understand. And that was one reason why I reached out to you for the podcast, because
Hmm.
I was like, Tanner's really digging in
Hmm.
to how does this impact our cognitive space?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great point too. And my always counter to that is right is when someone's like, well, it's on the screen, what's the big deal? It's like, have you never gotten emotional in a movie?
But that's a great question. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so if you can watch something and
Yeah.
it's fake, right?
Yeah.
That it's there for entertainment and everything else,
Right.
but it's still gonna make you feel feelings,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Within it. And so what happens when it's real? And then you need to be able to go out and do these missions and collect this data and watch these things happen and get treated like a robot after the fact and go, okay, you're good, go home,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all okay. And it's like to do that, and not just once, right? It's not like, oh, this is a singular event, right?
Yeah.
It's I've seen it probably 10,000 times
Yeah.
with it, because that's the other piece that people don't realize is, just like a college athlete, right? Let's take a football player in college. How do they get better? They watch tape, right?
Yeah.
They watch themselves performing to figure out the small, minute areas that they can then better themselves and become better.
Mhm.
Well, we're talking about things on a screen, right?
Mhm.
No one should be, blown away that anything on a screen is recorded,
Mhm.
right? With it. And so we would record our screens, be able to play them back and do it over and over and over and over again. I had one night that I watched 300 strikes happen in a
Wow.
night because I was tasked with just trying to better our tactics
Yeah.
and be able to go, hey, were the current tactics that we were utilizing with our weapons efficient? Or, could we pull them back a little bit and still get the
Mm,
same effect without expending so many weapons
yeah.
within it? And again, it's not like anyone's like, hey, you're about to watch this. This is about to be pretty, messed up.
Mm,
It was just not, go do this in between, you're flying and everything else and watch all these videos and, take notes and annotate. And, so everything was just treated as such face value
yeah.
with it. And again, I go back to that movie reference. It's like if you can sit there and bawl your eyes out at a movie that your brain knows is fake,
Right.
what happens when that movie's not fake?
Yeah.
What happens when there's no reset button?
Yeah.
Right? What happens when, actively that and you go home and, it's like there's tons of times where I went home and it was like hit the power on the TV and like, whatever, CNN pops up or whatever and they're
Yeah.
like drone strike here and I'm like, that was me. That's weird, like so then you get into this whole like, heroism to it and piece
Yeah.
with it and and it reinforces the patriotism of what you're doing. And that's the one thing that I tell everybody, right? There's not a single day that I'm ashamed of what I did in the military. I love what I
Yeah.
did in the military. But it's making people aware that these can absolutely take its toll.
Yeah.
And that, now you've got a lot of high performers that were, some of the best of the best in the military that are now walking around as shells of themselves
Hmm.
because their nervous system is so dysregulated
Hmm.
from being now in this constant state of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn that there's no there's no study on how what that's doing to people. They've looked at it in certain aspects, but most of the time when anyone's looked at it, and there's been four prominent studies over the years in the last decade by the Air Force Research Lab that's looked at this, but they're not looking at the veterans, right? And they're not looking at what's happening when people actually, again, pick that head up and go, all right, I'm out of the box. Now what?
Yeah.
Because personally for me, like that's, I did 10 years in this. I was
Hmm.
8 years in the military and then almost 3 years with General Atomics as a contractor working
Hmm.
for them, essentially doing the same thing. I just swapped my
Hmm.
flight suit for a polo. Granted, we weren't like employing weapons. But it was one of those that you're still doing the work, right? You're still talking about that, you're still, oh yeah, we had this one strike back in the day, kind of thing. And so you're still immersed in the ecosystem of it all. And so
Hmm.
it takes its own toll because of you can't get relief and you can't ever, you think about it, can't ever come up for air
Yeah.
within that area. And like I said, now you got people doing it for 10 to 20 years
Yeah. Yeah.
in that constant state with it. And so it makes for I've said this a handful of times, it was a melting pot of bad decisions
Yeah.
with how we were handled back then because it just
Mm,
was. There was just no, and it's not anybody's fault, it's not anybody directly,
mm,
but we Swiss cheese the heck out of that, right? Being the
yeah.
Swiss cheese
Yeah.
model where you just one thing after
Yeah.
another and it goes through every single hole and it's like
Yeah.
now you got a bunch of people that are running around that are struggling because of
Yeah.
it, because nobody anticipated what it's doing, and that's why I started the org I did because
Mm,
I at least want to put a voice to this group because it's not like this stuff's going away. It's not like
yeah.
we're like, hey, let's hang them up. It's not. It's let's hang up drones. We're done with them.
Yeah.
No, it's if anything, it's getting worse.
Right.
With it.
Yeah.
And that's the one aspect that's just not being taken into
Yeah.
account.
So Tanner, can you tell us kind of from, your experience, your work, your research, in case someone's unfamiliar with, PTSD and how
Mhm.
it would kind of manifest from these types of experiences. Can you describe kind of what the impacts are? And I know
Mhm.
you've alluded to this, but kind of like, describe or give some examples just so someone can kind of get a picture of how this plays in when the uniform's off, when you're
Yeah.
when you're out away from it, how is that still impacting kind of the human?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one that I say this a lot. Trauma's trauma,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't necessarily matter how you get the trauma,
Mhm.
right? But the brain rewiring that happens after the fact, and this perpetual, like I alluded to earlier, a lot of the people that are coming from remote warfare are now dealing with this weird aspect of, traditional PTSD. Usually you see one type of reaction being that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right? So it's either, hey, I'm going to get aggressive about it. I'm
Mhm.
going to, get the heck out of here. I'm going to tell people what they want to hear, right?
Mhm.
Being the fawn there, or I'm just going to lock up and, deer in the headlights until it goes
Mhm.
away. Um, but like for me, and I know this because I talked about this with my community a lot, is it's this bastardized version of all four
Mhm.
with it. So that's one where I have an issue with what we talk about, with like PTSD in general and
Mhm.
labeling that for remote warfare.
Mhm.
And not because it's necessarily like, or we need to have this special thing with this. I could care less what we
Mhm.
call it. But the problem is the stigmas behind all this.
Mhm.
And so the stigma with PTSD is when you look at the PTSD checklist or the PCL-5
Yeah.
that's put out there for it, right? Like line two is like, tell me about like with the event. And it's
Yeah.
like, which one you want? I
Yeah.
got 10,000 of them.
Yeah.
I can't just take all this trauma and just shove it into a sock and call it one event,
Yeah.
right? With it. And so that's a really hard thing for veterans that are getting out or transitioning and things like
Mhm.
that with it, and separating, and whatnot, because they get put into this and then right away their brain goes, does not compute, right?
Mhm.
I don't have one event. I have tens of thousands of events.
Mhm.
Where's my intake for that? And so that's where I started messing around with it. With that, I stripped the whole thing down and I actually rebuilt it to be more applicable. That's one of the projects that we have. It's called the Recon Survey, and it essentially looks at different things that traditional screening processes miss. So it's
Mhm.
things like identity crisis, moral injury, um, and those types of things that can happen that are very common in the remote warfare community. Because again, you're dealing with, I'm having to make these life or death decisions or not, and just watch stuff happen. And then you're fighting internally with yourself with the moral injury piece of it, right? Because it's not about the stuff that, when I was employing weapons, right? That's not the stuff that keeps me up at night. It's about all the horrendous crap I had to watch it, besides
Mhm.
that, people getting shredded apart and
Mhm.
things like that with it. And it's just, so it made it very difficult because now I'm having to sit there and have these intrusive thoughts that hit me with it. Right. And you talk about, what are some unique aspects to it? And well, painting the picture here that we have with how these operations were done, my brain doesn't stop analyzing ever,
Yeah.
to an insane level.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear a noise, my brain's, what's that? What is that? When is that?
Mhm.
Is that supposed to happen? Is that timed?
Mhm.
Is that
Mhm.
the washer? Is that the dishwasher? What is
Mhm.
it? All the way up to like, oh, I'm gonna go run to the gas station and fill up a gas can, right?
Yeah.
Um, at 3 miles down the road, and my brain goes, well, let's think about everything that could go wrong in between there and here. And I'm like, what? It's 3 miles away, and I'm on a dirt road. Like there ain't much not happen as long as I don't
Yeah.
run into a tractor.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
right.
it's that kind of stuff that really hits these people and is so difficult to deal with. And then you bring in the identity crisis piece to this,
Mhm.
and this little lump of meat up here loves to tell you that, hey, you're not good enough. Hey, what you did didn't matter.
Mhm.
Um, and then we get the stigmas from the public anyways of like, oh, why do you have a flight suit on? You're not in the plane. It's like, give me a
Mhm.
break. It's like, why are we still having that argument? Who cares? At the end of the day, with it all. And so again, it makes for a unique aspect for these operators to deal with on the day to day because they're constantly struggling, and I'm
Mhm.
constantly overcritical of every decision that I make, with my day to day, with my family, with my kids, whatever it is. And so and then it causes you to second guess, it causes you to have doubts, it causes, you want to talk about, uh the one thing that we look at with like especially suicide rates, right? And
Mhm.
unfortunately, our community gets rocked with this, because a lot of people don't understand it and they don't understand what's going on in their own head, because of it, because of, those little gremlins that are going, you're not good enough, with it, or what you did didn't matter, or it's just a video game, and it's like, and you start believing that because
Mhm.
that's the stigmas
Mhm.
around the entire thing. And so then people turn to, horrible coping skills or
Mhm.
alcohol and things like that, with it. And I was an alcoholic for years, with it because it was the only way to, you white knuckle it,
Mhm.
and get through it, kind of thing. And it was a horrible, way to cope because then it just
Mhm.
exasperated everything too,
Mhm.
and made everything so much worse. So that's the hard part with it is it's like it presents itself, and it can be things like, just you feel like you're just constantly analyzing every little thing around you, with it and needing to figure out what every little thing is that's happening, every little thing that's going on with it, and how that affects you.
Mhm.
And all I'm trying to do is make a peanut butter sandwich.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't need to analyze all this, but
Mhm.
I can't turn it off,
Yeah.
because of that operation and what I did.
Yeah. Well, it's that's a great description of the impacts. When just to kind of give you a little background to prep my next question,
Sure.
is so my first experience with the VA was
Hmm.
kind of related to GWAT veterans. We would go in, we go see mental health, and Tanner, this was like 2000s. They don't understand Iraq, Afghanistan. The VA employees wanted to, they look at everything like it was Vietnam because that's who
Yes.
they'd been seeing for so long. And
Yep.
when I came across your stuff online, the little alarm that was going off, or the red flag for me in terms of, oh my gosh, I got to get him on here, was that finally, this is 2025.
Yep.
Finally, my family gets decent, GWAT appropriate VA care. This has
Yep.
taken so long. And it's like I have explained to VA therapists for over a decade what an IED is.
Yep.
They're just so Vietnam focused. So it's like they didn't update. Now they finally have. And when I found your
Hmm.
stuff online, I was like, oh my gosh, these remote warriors are in the same boat my family was,
Hmm.
a decade ago in terms of what I suspect. And this is the next question is your
Yep.
kind of insights on it. But like when I was hearing your stuff, I'm like, I'm concerned, like the
Yeah.
VA, DOD, military, healthcare, are they tracking on this? Because I know how long it took them just to comprehend roadside bomb. So
Exactly.
like,
Exactly. Yep.
like
No, 100%. And that's the biggest issue with all of this, right? Is
yeah.
I go into a VA appointment,
Yeah.
right? It took me 6.5 years to finally even get PTSD on my healthcare side, even
Yeah.
recognized, even after saying like, listen, I've got an award right there that says every person I've ever taken out and things like that with it, and the
Yeah.
vehicle-borne IEDs and things like that we had
Yeah.
to deal with, and it's like, but still, I'm having to justify all of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm having to prove that, this is, an issue and prove that this trauma is real per
Yeah.
se,
Yeah.
with it. And so, when you get a 30-minute appointment and I got to spend 25 minutes of it talking about, hey, do you
You
know what a
have to
drone is?
explain. I
Right?
know.
And then do you understand how if I didn't leave the country,
Mhm.
how I can still have trauma,
Mhm.
right? And because I can
Mhm.
tell you, even after, 15, 20 years of this, being in the community, and really we're at 25 now with when the Predator
Yeah.
came on in '01,
Yeah.
um, it's that there's still such a lack of understanding across the board with it. And that's the biggest issue is you still have people getting med boarded. One of my best friends is in the process of a med board right now for PTSD.
Mhm.
And a couple months ago, he was going through, and the flight doc looked him in the face and said, well, I'm looking at your record, and you never deployed. So how can you have trauma? And it's
Yeah.
like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like that's the biggest slap in the face ever, and just shows
Yeah.
how absolutely disconnected we are with the
Yeah.
entire thing because we're still treating shell shock in the
I
VA.
know.
It's like that's arguably what this is. Yes, there's
Yeah.
been little updates in '02 and things like that within the
Mhm.
checklist itself, sure. But we are nowhere near where we need to be for intaking correctly with
Mhm.
these individuals. And the other thing with this is everyone thinks that this is such a small group of individuals, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. We're working on what the actual like veteran numbers are themselves,
Yeah.
but when we actually have a thing with the VA, to be able to get those numbers specifically. But right now, my estimate with it is like there's like 250,000 active operators within it right
Oh,
now.
wow.
Because you're looking at things like sensor operators, you're looking at
Mhm,
things like, RPA pilots, you're
mhm,
looking at, the Intel, SIGINT, anything like that with it.
mhm,
That can be a huge thing. And so when you factor all those things in, now all of a sudden, this community gets really large really quick
mhm.
with it, and it's like, man, if we just look at this the correct way,
Yeah,
being, complete reform across the board, unfortunately.
yeah,
You talk about what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, it was burn pits, right? Was the big thing with that, and dealing with that. And before that was really Vietnam. And it's like this is
mhm,
arguably, in for the teens and the 20s,
mhm,
in the 2000s here, this is the next epidemic
yeah,
across the board, because it's a group that nobody knows is struggling, nobody
yeah,
recognizes is struggling,
yeah,
and none of the information that's out there is truly able to support these operators and these warriors, because it doesn't even come close to be able to be, go through it. And I know because I've been through freaking CBT, CPT, the behavioral therapy, the
yeah,
processing therapy, the EMDR, all of it, and none of it freaking even gets
mhm,
touches,
mhm,
what I've been through, because it's always addressing one little aspect of the entire thing.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's it's helpful to hear that. I was unaware the numbers like that is massive, Tanner.
Hmm.
That just makes kind of this gap in care coming from, DoD medical and then VA just so much more urgent or so, so
Yes.
urgent to address. So I know, you're very involved in addressing these
Hmm.
challenges for the community. Can you tell us kind of like, if there's a listener, a clinician, a provider, other veterans that want to get involved in this area, addressing this, coming up with
Hmm.
solutions, what would you recommend? What are some kind of like action items you would give them in terms of this?
Yeah, of course. No, I mean the biggest thing with that is needing things like, one, it needs a systemic overhaul from start to finish, right? With this, and that's what I've started the organization I have, and we're branching off with a nonprofit section to be able to help with it too, because I realize how many different areas. This isn't going to be like, hey, we provide one thing, one product, one service, and then all right, we're done,
Yeah.
kind of thing. This needs a full-blown systemic, just strip down and rebuild
Mm,
with the entire thing. And so it's different things like we have education materials
mhm,
for people to be able to put plain language
mhm,
into, what they may be experiencing. So if there's an operator out there that, it's just like, man, I kind of finally, this person seems like they know what they're talking about. We can put it even more into words with it. And that's, in 3 months time frame, we've built an entire guide on how to break down exactly what this is. And that's the crazy thing with
mhm.
all everything to do with remote warriors. None of this existed 90 days ago. Not
Wow.
even the name. I woke up in a
Wow.
fever and went, I'm gonna fix this. And I think I sat at my computer for a week straight and just cranked out as much content as I could put on paper, because my brain was going a million miles a minute.
Mhm.
Thank you, hyperfixation from PTSD. But in that moment, it's a superpower. But so one, educating, right? That's the
Mhm.
biggest piece to this, and this is why I do jump on podcasts with the, like these, and being able to just talk about this stuff, because I recognize that there's so many areas that are just not covered correctly
Mhm.
out there with it. So, um, that being able to utilize our resources, we actually have training plans for the VA, for Guard and Reserve units, for
Mhm.
professional military education, across the board, and being able to provide like, hey, these are the areas, and this is what moral injury looks like in an operator,
Yeah.
right? This is what identity crisis looks like. This is
Yeah.
what burnout looks like,
Yeah.
right? And being able to have things like, little cue cards that can sit on commanders' desks, and
Mhm.
being able to go like, this is, what to do. And instead of just creating this, all right, let's just shove them in the box and chuck them out the door kind of thing, Instead, then we need to be able to work through that and have these areas that they can look at, areas that they can, go to and go, okay, let me hang my hat on that kind of thing. So there's a lot more resources out there that people realize that we provide within this system. And then it's being able to, talking about speaking engagements and things like that with it. Um, and then just the educational materials themselves, all the way down to, we have and I've got one sitting here actually, this little ammo can, right? This one's empty, but it's our staple panic pack with it. And what the purpose of that, and it's not just for remote warriors. I'll put that out there
Yeah.
right there. It's anybody that deals with panic attacks and things like that with it, because I would get like 3 to 4 a day
Yeah.
with it, and because my nervous system is just so on the fritz all the time
Yeah.
with it, so it's different calming grounding tools actually in there. And you open it up half the time and everyone's like, what is this, a child's box here? Because it's little silicone worry stones, it's little lavender
Yeah.
rollers,
Yeah.
it's little things like that that essentially hit all five senses,
Yeah.
and be able to put a small 11-inch ammo can out there
Mhm.
that somebody can take, put underneath their, nightstand, put underneath their bed,
Mhm.
whatever. And then when they're dealing with a panic attack, because what does everybody do with them? Everybody I talk to, and I'm like, what do you do for a panic attack? They're just white knuckle and hold on, right? Ride the
Yeah.
lightning until it ends,
Yes.
kind of thing. And that's the only way. But
Mhm.
this type of thing, I've found this has drastically reduced it. So,
Wow.
for a lot of people across the board with it, which is extremely helpful
Yeah.
with it by being able to not essentially knock out and go, hey, get out of your head and come right back here, right?
Mhm.
To whatever moment you're in, when anything like that. So, and I'll make sure I get you the link to it because we actually have a sign up sheet that we take anytime we've got Amazon wish lists for the entire thing that fulfill
Oh,
them.
wow. Yeah.
And then anytime we get them, they ship right here. That's what's over my shoulder there, if I can get my hand right. Is this whole entire shelf is all panic pack items there with it, and being able to just we pack these ammo cans, I drop them in a box and ship them out to these veterans for at no cost to them, because
Wow.
they've suffered enough at the end
Yeah.
of the day when it comes down to it, and being able to have real tools to be able to help with that. And another initiative we have is our smart home tech. So we're working on things that you can walk into a room and say panic mode with like an Alexa or something like that,
Yeah.
and it'll do things like drop the blinds.
Oh,
It'll do things
wow.
like turn a fan on, right? Because
Yeah.
temperature regulation is a big
Mhm.
thing. Because a lot of people don't realize when you're going through a panic attack, your body is essentially trying to, I equate it to hypothermia, right?
Mhm.
Your body is essentially trying to pull all your blood and everything else away from your extremities, which is why your hands and feet get cold with it, and save yourself. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's why you get warm, and different things like that. And then usually, what does it do? It goes to your legs and it goes to your chest, right? Because that's your body is essentially with that fight, flight, freeze, and fawn trying to go, all right, whichever one we got to do, let's get ready for. Right. And you're like, I just, the a lid dropped on the ground. Like, no, there's no threat here. But your
Yeah.
body, the biological response doesn't change from that.
Mhm.
So it's being able to couple, that panic pack with an environment that is safe and that is okay. And being able to, walk in and have like diffusers and things like that, and a salt lamp and, those types of things that people can put into their home. So we have guides and resources on how to build your own. And with it, and I've got the crazy idea that we're constantly working funding, and
Nice.
looking for, people to donate products and things like that, to be able to essentially build out like Pelican boxes
Mhm.
of electronics that we can ship to these people and say, here's a starter kit for you to get rolling on your own, lack of a better term, safe space in your home
Mhm.
that is okay to not be okay
Mhm.
in, because
Mhm.
we can throw all the 8 week modalities at people that we want. We can throw all the retreats. We can throw all the, hey, let's do once a week of therapy for an hour. That's great. And I will never, rat on any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But the problem is, this trauma doesn't happen in a vacuum, and neither does recovery. So when we're
Mhm.
not addressing it at home, and we're not addressing it in these areas
Mhm.
that are where the day-to-day stresses are happening,
Mhm.
we're missing the mark
Mhm.
across the board completely. So that's really the big initiatives that we have with it, is just the educational pieces, and then the no kidding um, resources like the panic packs and the smart home
Mhm.
tech to just, you know, punch a panic attack in the face and
Yeah.
go, not today, kind of thing. Because right now, it's what do you do? Oh, you got 988. And again, it's a good, fantastic resource. I've called it.
Mhm.
I've been there. It's a fantastic resource, but once you hang up that phone, like, what are you supposed to do past that? You just sit there with your own thoughts and stew, and that's why you're in the situation in the first place. So, it's being able to provide those pieces
Yeah.
to do it. And our intake form actually has like it gives you like little customizable options. You can pick what you
Oh,
like and that type
yeah.
of thing. And it's all stuff that I've got one that sits under my bed. And I use it a handful of times a week with
Yeah.
it between that and my service dog that sits laying
Yeah.
behind me there. So it's definitely we've seen it be really highly effective there.
Oh, well, no, it's so encouraging to just hear, of the work that you're continuing to do. And I'm so excited to see how that continues to grow. So,
Absolutely. No, we're very excited with it and being able to push this stuff forward and hopefully get to a point that we can have all this stuff funded and be able to take care of any combat
yeah.
veteran, any person. The big dream is eventually, have it for anybody that may deal with anxiety, PTSD, that type of thing where those invisible wounds and being able to help them and make that environment better.
Well, thank you so much, Tanner, for coming on the show and
Of
sharing
course.
your insights. I know your contributions to our nation, continue to impact so many, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me on this
Of
very
course.
important topic. So,
Yes. Thank you so much for your time, Hannah. I appreciate it.
and to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spheres. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.